The wind whipped sideways like a lash, the snow torn into white ribbons skimming across the ground. And in the North Atlantic, where the sun vanished for months at a time, winter didn't arrive gently. It slammed down like an iron door, locking every escape. In 9th century Iceland, opening the door for more than 3 seconds meant a blade-sharp burst of cold would cut straight into the house, sweep along the floor, and swallow the warmth the family had guarded for hours. There was nowhere to run. Outside was a storm wind strong enough to knock down a grown man. Beneath their feet, the earth was frozen so hard a shovel would spring back. And ahead of them were months without light, without trees, without anything that could shield them except the very brutality nature hurled at their faces. And when the first Norse settlers stepped onto that black sand shore, they understood instantly that no one was coming to save them. No one was bringing wood or coal or anything familiar from home. They were standing in a land so cold that even the smallest mistake became a death sentence. This place did not give them time to adapt. It forced them to realize that if they wanted to survive one more season, just one more, they had to learn how to turn the very elements that could kill them into the tools that might save them. If you ever thought the harsh climate was just a backdrop in Viking stories, try imagining yourself standing there in that exact moment. You'll understand why every choice they made carried the imprint of absolute survival. And if this opening sparks your curiosity, keep watching to see how they pulled off something that should have been impossible. When the Norse pushed deeper into Iceland's interior, their first shock didn't come from the blizzards or the endless darkness. It came from the absolute absence of the one resource their entire building tradition depended on: wood. Back in Scandinavia, they were used to raising great halls from oak trunks, steep roofs made from split timber, towering beams strong enough to hold tons of snow. With a single season of cutting, a family could gather enough lumber to build a house that sheltered generations. But here, all they saw were cold grasslands and bare volcanic rock, with stunted birch shrubs so small they couldn't even supply a single roof beam, let alone the skeleton of a home. And the terrifying part wasn't just the lack of material. It was the quiet realization spreading through every group. They would not survive the winter unless they found a way to build a warm, sturdy, wind-tight house in the few short months before the storms returned. No wood meant no roof, no walls, no frame, no fuel to keep a fire burning each day. One wrong construction decision meant the house would freeze from the inside out, and an entire family might never see the next spring. In that precarious moment, they were forced to confront a question that would reshape the entire history of settlement in the North Atlantic. When the foundation of your civilization disappears, where do you begin to rebuild? In the moment when every last hope seemed scraped clean off that frozen ground, the answer emerged from a place no one expected, right beneath their feet. The very thing modern people step over without a second thought, the thin grass layer and the heavy, damp-scented turf blocks, turned out to be the material that saved an entire community from extinction. And here's the twist. The replacement for wood wasn't stone, wasn't metal. It was grass. Turf, that compressed blend of soil roots grass formed over centuries, holds a dense web of fibers packed with thousands of tiny air pockets. And those pockets, by the basic laws of thermodynamics, become a natural insulation layer so powerful it still leaves many modern engineers puzzled. Turf walls nearly 2 meters thick can retain heat better than most wooden houses, steel frame houses, and even many concrete homes built in 2025. A fact that sounds absurd until you look at the archaeological data from Iceland and Greenland. The Norse began cutting turf blocks like bricks, stacking them in overlapping herringbone patterns so the weight pressed inward rather than collapsing outward. Once the walls stood firm, they covered the entire roof with a massive layer of turf, turning the home into a living hill where the roots kept growing, knitting, binding every layer together as if nature itself had decided to help them build. And within that paradox, when the enemy becomes the ally, lies a truth modern society rarely admits. Sometimes the strongest technology isn't a machine, but the way you understand the environment. If you always thought grass was just something you trimmed in your yard, tell me in the comments, would you believe a block of turf could outperform modern heating tech? You might be surprised by what people in the past accomplished when all they had left was earth, wind, and the will to survive. In a world so starved of wood that even a single branch became a treasure, the Norse stumbled upon a material so strange that without archaeological proof, most people today would assume it was nothing more than legend. Here's the plot twist. The timber used to build Icelandic houses did not come from Iceland at all. Not from forests, not from valleys, but from Siberia, thousands of kilometers away, drifting across the Arctic Ocean on a years-long journey. When massive rivers like the Ob, Lena, and Yenisei pushed whole forests worth of felled trees into the northern seas, the logs became trapped in ice, locked into frozen columns, sleeping beneath the Arctic sky. The Arctic drift current then carried that ice around the pole, year after year, until the waters near Greenland and Iceland warmed just enough for the ice to break apart, releasing enormous Siberian logs onto the beaches like gifts from some mysterious northern god. For the Norse, every piece of driftwood was a miracle. Siberian timber was dense, long, straight, perfect for beams, posts, roof spines, and, most importantly, free. Icelandic law was explicit. Any driftwood that washed up on your land belonged entirely to you, a personal treasure with the weight of gold. Families who heard word of a driftwood landing would drop everything, bringing whole groups to the coast to haul each log ashore, dry it, cut it, and store it like an heirloom. And that paradox, a civilization surviving on trees that never once saw their original forests, became the backbone of one of the most resilient architectural traditions in the North Atlantic. If it surprises you that an entire Viking building system relied on gifts from the other side of the world, leave a comment. How many years do you think a single tree drifted before finally reaching Iceland? With turf for the walls and driftwood for the frame, the Norse stepped into the most decisive phase of all, building a house that could withstand North Atlantic storms for decades. And the surprising truth is that this process wasn't primitive at all. It carried the precision of a survival machine engineered down to every layer of soil, every stone, every joint. They began by choosing a spot on a gentle slope for natural drainage, then laid down a flat bed of foundation stones, a barrier that kept moisture away from the turf and created a load-bearing platform for the entire structure. After that came the incredibly economical wooden frame, a few main posts, carefully joined crossbeams, and a long ridge beam running through the center like the spine of some rising prehistoric creature. Once the frame stood firm, the hardest task began, stacking tens of thousands of turf blocks around the skeleton. Each layer overlapped so the compression pushed inward rather than cracking outward. Walls nearly 2 meters thick rose slowly, layer upon layer, until the house became a single seamless mass of earth. Then came the roof, heavy beams laid across the ridge, blanketed with thick turf like the hide of a wild animal. When finished, the house practically disappeared into the landscape, leaving only a small doorway that looked more like the entrance to a cave. And here lies the miracle. They didn't fight nature. They let nature finish the job. Rain pushed the roots deeper. Snow added another layer of insulation. Wind pressed the roof tighter into place. With every passing season, the house grew stronger, almost as if Iceland itself had accepted it, claimed it, and chosen to protect it. On nights when the wind scraped across the roof like metal grinding against metal, when the temperature outside dropped to 20 degrees, and the snow was flung through the air like flashing white blades, something happened inside a turf house that many archaeologists have described with one word: mysterious. You step into a home that, from the outside, looks like nothing more than a low, grassy mound. The door closes behind you, and the first thing you feel is not the breath of the fire, but warmth seeping out from the very walls themselves. Press your hand against the root-bound surface, and you'll sense a faint heat pushing back into your palm, as if something alive were hidden deep inside. Out there, a person would freeze to death in hours, but inside this half-buried, half-sheltered home, you could sit in a short-sleeved shirt and still feel a steady surrounding warmth. The mechanism behind this wonder sounds simple, yet it defies intuition. A fireplace smaller than a stock pot sits in the middle of the house, just a shallow pit filled with peat or a few pieces of driftwood. But as it gives off heat, the nearly 2-meter-thick turf walls absorb every bit of it, holding it the way a giant thermal battery would. When the flames die down, the walls start releasing the stored heat, keeping the interior warm through the night without another stick of fuel. Many modern engineers openly admit that a turf house equipped with a primitive fire pit can outperform a $20,000 HVAC system in maintaining stable heat. Some call it primitive science, some call it instinctive architecture, but the deeper you study it, the more it feels like the Norse brushed against thermodynamic principles long before humanity ever named them. If you're impressed that walls made of earth can do what modern technology sometimes struggles to achieve, leave a comment. Do you think the Viking heat battery worked because of the material itself, or because of the survival mindset behind it? In the thick, suffocating darkness of those endless winter nights, when the fire in the hearth had burned past its brightness and only a faint red core pulsed like a weakening heartbeat, the Norse entered a phase of survival that makes many modern people shiver just hearing about it. They used their own bodies as the final heating system. Inside a turf house, where every scrap of warmth had to be preserved, no one slept scattered across the room. They lay pressed so closely together that one person's breath brushed the neck of the next. Not because of family affection, but because of the law of cold. Sleep apart equals die. The weaker ones, the elderly, the sick, the small children, were placed between two stronger adults. It wasn't gentle cuddling the way modern people imagine. It was compression, using the heat of two strong bodies to keep the person in the middle from slipping into hypothermia. In many families, deciding who slept where was a matter of life and death, and sometimes the hardest decision of the winter. But the real shock lies here. It wasn't just people keeping each other alive. Livestock heated the house too. Many turf homes were built directly against sheep or cattle stalls, separated only by a thin wall. The animals' heavy, humid, warm breath created a slow but steady heat flow that raised the indoor temperature by a few degrees, and those few degrees were the razor-thin line between survival and freezing. Modern people can build elegant fireplaces, buy electric blankets, run heaters all night, but few would dare do what Vikings considered normal: If you've read this far and feel a chill down your spine, leave a comment. Could you sleep wedged between two people and beside a livestock stall just to make it through the 20 degrees C? In a land where the wind could rip roofs straight off their beams and the cold slipped through every gap like a hunting creature, the Norse discovered a hidden technique that many other civilizations wouldn't reach for thousands of years. They lowered the entire house beneath the surface of the earth. Not for aesthetics, but for one brutal truth. Wind cannot bite what it cannot reach. By digging the floor lower than the surrounding ground, they stepped into a strangely stable thermal zone, where even if blizzards screamed overhead, the soil below held to a warmer, steadier, non-lethal temperature. When you descend into a turf house, it feels as if you're entering the den of some enormous animal, quiet, warming, separated from the frozen world above. The surrounding earth walls didn't just block the wind. They absorbed heat from the fire, from human bodies, from the breath of livestock, and held it deep like stored treasure. And snow, the very thing people fear, piled on the roof as a natural insulating blanket, making the house even warmer. This effect was so strong that archaeologists repeatedly note, even when outside temperatures hit 20 degrees, these ancient semi-dug homes maintained a stable warmth inside, sometimes enough for people to sit and work without heavy clothing. It's hard to believe something so simple could outperform so many modern structures. What about you? If the power went out for 72 hours, would you rather be in a concrete house or in a Viking semi-buried turf home? In medieval Europe, you could tell instantly who was king, who was noble, and who was just a peasant. One glance at a house was enough. But in Viking-era Iceland, every one of those rules was torn apart like a piece of hide caught in a storm. Rich or poor, powerful or insignificant, everyone lived in a mound of earth. The turf house became the most equalizing force nature had ever imposed on humans. Chieftains, farmers, servants, all ducked through the same tiny doorway, stepped onto the same dirt floor, breathed the same smoky air, and slept beneath the same grass-covered roof. And here comes the paradox. On the outside, every house looked identical, like low, grassy burial mounds scattered across a frozen valley. But step inside, and the real hierarchy appeared instantly. A chieftain could transform his interior into a completely different world. Carved wooden panels imported from Norway, massive driftwood beams rare enough to be prized, beds layered with reindeer hide, and sometimes even a house within a house. An intricate wooden chamber built inside the turf shell for extra warmth and as a display of authority. Meanwhile, the homes of ordinary families remained simple turf walls, stone stools, sheep-wool bedding, and rafters blackened by smoke. From the outside, you couldn't tell anyone apart. From the inside, the divide was as clear as a streak of light across dark ground. But it was precisely nature's overwhelming power that forced every class to bow before a truth no one could escape. In Iceland, status couldn't protect you from the cold. It was the turf house, not your wealth, not your name, that decided whether you lived or died. If the power went out for 72 hours, would your home become a shelter or a block of ice? That's a question anyone living in the modern world should be asking, especially as every winter grows harsher. And it was the final problem the Norse solved over 1,000 years ago. Not with machines, not with technology, but by staring directly at nature and accepting one simple truth. To survive, you have to turn the environment into an ally. The turf house wasn't remarkable because of its appearance. It was a silent, stubborn survival engine built on 3 principles that even developed nations today are still trying to replicate. using earth as a thermal battery, reducing heat loss with a semi-buried design, and maximizing the warmth of human and animal bodies. These homes didn't need wiring, fans, or expensive HVAC systems. They kept heat using the very materials we tend to ignore: earth, grass, stone, and a few pieces of driftwood from faraway shores. What's strange is that as modern architecture becomes more impressive on the outside, it falls far behind the stability of the humble mounds the Vikings built simply to make it through winter. So when you stand before a turf house today, you're not just looking at a relic, you're seeing a philosophy. Survival doesn't come from conquering nature, but from understanding it so deeply that it ends up protecting you. If this gives you something to think about, feel free to leave a comment. In the future, do you think people will return to the ways our ancestors built, or continue relying on technology? And don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow the next stories, the ancient survival secrets that might one day save us all.